My husband's whole family dressed in white at our wedding to show I'd never be good enough for their son. So, I made sure they became laughingstocks. Have you ever met someone who looked at you and, within seconds, decided they hated your guts? Someone who then systematically and publicly tried to destroy your relationship, your wedding, and your peace? Well, that was my introduction to my mother-in-law, Rita, and the day I got married felt less like a celebration and more like a tactical victory in a war I never asked to fight. Brian and I, we met at a veterinary conference in Denver. He was up there, presenting on equine surgery, all passionate and brilliant. I was there, representing my small animal practice. We bonded, of course, over terrible conference coffee, but more importantly, over our shared obsession with emergency medicine. You know, that intense, high-stakes focus? 6 months later, right back at that same conference, he proposed. It was perfect, a perfect circle. But his family? Their reaction was immediate, and it was vicious. His mother, Rita, called Brian in tears, wailing that he was throwing his life away. His father, Richard, sent a formal email, listing all the women from their country club who would have been better choices. And his sister, Sophia, she took it to a whole new level. She started a group chat with the extended family. She actually called it Brian's mistake. And in it, they shared articles about divorce rates. They didn't know Brian had accidentally seen it when he borrowed Sophia's phone. For 2 years, I tried everything. Everything. I brought Rita her favorite flowers on every visit, helped Richard with his classic car restoration research, even dragged myself to Sophia's incredibly boring charity luncheons where her friends would whisper about me being a gold digger. Never mind that I made more money than Brian. Nothing worked. They had their sights set on Victoria, the daughter of their best friends, who'd been waiting for Brian to notice her since high school. Victoria, who still called him twice a week. Victoria, whose parents owned half the commercial real estate in town. The perfect match in their eyes. I finally stopped trying after Rita's Thanksgiving incident. She'd invited Victoria to dinner without telling us, seated her right next to Brian, and spent the entire meal talking about their shared memories. I just sat there like furniture, invisible. That night, Brian finally laid it out. He told them, point blank, that if they couldn't respect me, they wouldn't be part of our lives. They backed off, but only superficially. The wedding planning revealed their true strategy. Rita insisted on being involved, then criticized every single choice. The venue was too rustic. The flowers were too simple. The caterer wasn't prestigious enough. She offered to pay for upgrades, but only if she could make all the decisions. We declined, paid for everything ourselves. 3 days before the wedding, Sophia called Brian, panicking. She'd seen our cousin posting about her bridesmaid dress and realized she'd bought the exact same style I had described for my own dress. Could she still wear it? She asked, sounding apologetic. Brian, ever direct, told her, absolutely not. Buy something else. She agreed. The morning of our wedding, I was getting ready with my bridesmaids. The photographer knocked. He needed to discuss something urgent. Brian's family had arrived for pre-ceremony photos, and there was a situation. Every single one of them was wearing white. Rita was in a white beaded gown that looked suspiciously like a mother of the bride dress because, well, it was one. Richard was in a white suit. Sophia was in a white cocktail dress. Brian's grandmother, his aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them, 23 people, all dressed like they were attending their own weddings. The photographer didn't know what to do. My maid of honor, Julia, started cursing. My mother went silent, which, believe me, was much worse than yelling. I asked the photographer to give us a moment. I sat down. They wanted to ruin my wedding. They wanted the photos to look ridiculous, for everyone to talk about how his family upstaged me, for the day to be about their protest instead of our marriage. But then I remembered something. Julia's sister managed a Halloween store that stayed open year-round. I called her. Do you have costume accessories in bulk? I asked. Specifically, those cheap, bright red t-shirts from last Halloween's zombie run? The ones with fake blood spatters that say Survivor in huge letters. She had boxes of them. Julia and 2 bridesmaids drove there. Fast. While I continued getting ready. They came back with 30 shirts and a bag of accessories. I had the wedding coordinator call a quick meeting with Brian's family in the garden, away from other guests. I walked out in my wedding dress, carrying the box of shirts. Rita started to speak, probably to make some excuse, but I cut her off. You have 2 choices, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Put these on over your clothes right now or leave. The ceremony starts in 20 minutes. Sophia laughed. You're being ridiculous, she scoffed. You can't force us to ruin our outfits. Richard said I had no right to make demands. Rita called me a controlling witch who'd finally shown my true colors. That's when Brian appeared. He'd been waiting inside, letting me handle it first. He looked at his family, all dressed in white, and said 5 words. Put them on, or go. Their jaws dropped. I raised my hand to stop Rita before she could speak, cutting off whatever excuse about family tradition she was planning to spin. The garden felt too quiet. 23 people in white stared at me, holding this box of bright red shirts. I realized in that exact moment this was it. This moment would define whether Brian and I spent our marriage fighting his family's ambushes or living by our own rules. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all waiting to see if I'd back down. If the nice veterinarian who brought flowers and attended charity luncheons would fold. Under pressure, like she always had before. But I was done folding. Brian's grandmother broke the silence. She reached into the box, pulled out a shirt, examined the fake blood and the survivor text. She looked at Rita, then at me, then back at the shirt. Her voice was steady, practical. I'm too old for this nonsense, she declared. I want to see my grandson get married today. She pulled the red shirt over her pale blue dress, not waiting for permission. Her practical surrender cracked their united front immediately. 2 of Brian's younger cousins stepped forward, reluctantly grabbing shirts. Their faces showed more embarrassment than defiance now. One cousin caught my eye and mouthed sorry before pulling his shirt on. The other kept his head down, ashamed. Richard's face went red with anger. This is humiliating, he declared. I refuse to be dictated to by someone who's been in the family for 5 minutes. His voice shook with wounded pride. Rita stood frozen beside him, her eyes darting between me, Brian, and the arriving guests visible through the garden gate. She was calculating which would cost her more social capital, doubling down or backing down. Her mouth opened and closed twice, no words. Sophia pulled out her phone, aimed it at the shirts, probably planning to document this as evidence for her social media followers. Brian stepped forward before she could take the photo. He told her quietly, anyone who posts about this before we approve the narrative will be removed from all wedding photos and asked to leave. His voice was calm but firm. The threat of social exclusion made Sophia lower her phone with a scowl. Being erased from the public record mattered more to her than documenting her protest. Julia appeared at my side with 2 other bridesmaids, backing her up. We started handing shirts directly to family members, maintaining eye contact. We're not negotiating or explaining anymore, Argeza said. The physical act of pressing fabric into their hands forced a decision. I watched their unity crumble as individual choices replaced group defiance. Some pulled shirts on immediately, avoiding my eyes. Others clutched the shirts, looking to Rita for guidance she wasn't providing. Brian's aunt took her shirt and whispered, "Thank you." It surprised me until I realized she was thanking me for not making them leave. His uncle muttered something about it being the most ridiculous wedding, but he yanked the shirt over his white button-down anyway. His wife followed, a tight expression on her face that said she was mad, but not mad enough to miss her nephew's wedding. I noticed the red shirts covered most of the white underneath. The fake blood spatters actually looked decent against the garden greenery. Cameron, the photographer, could work with this. Rita finally spoke. Her voice shook with either rage or tears. "You're making a mockery of a sacred day," she hissed. "I won't forget this humiliation you forced on Brian's family." I met her eyes. "You made your choice," I said calmly, though my heart pounded. "We're simply making sure our wedding photos reflect our boundaries, rather than your protest. You can wear the shirt, or watch from the parking lot." My voice didn't shake. Richard grabbed Rita's arm, pulled her aside for a whispered argument. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read their body language. He was calculating the social cost of leaving versus staying. She was realizing that walking out would make them look worse than wearing a zombie shirt. Their discussion grew intense. Rita's hands moved in sharp gestures. Richard's jaw clenched. After 30 seconds, Richard snatched 2 shirts from the box. He thrust one at Rita with a gesture that screamed resentful compliance. I watched Rita pull the red shirt over her expensive white gown. Her hands trembled with fury. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. This could have been avoided if she'd just let me have one day. Just one single day. Sophia was the last holdout. Brian walked over to her. He said simply, "I love you, but you need to decide right now whether you're my sister or my adversary." His voice broke slightly. Sophia stared at him. Her face cycled through anger, hurt, and shame. She took the shirt with a dramatic eye roll, meant to show she was complying under duress. As she pulled it on, her hand shook too. She wasn't as confident in this rebellion as she wanted everyone to believe. Poppy, the coordinator, appeared with perfect timing. "Guests are seated. We're ready to begin." Her professional cheerfulness cut through the tension. I looked at Brian's family, all in red survivor shirts over their white clothes. Instead of guilt, I felt clear. They tried to ruin this day, and we turned their sabotage into something we controlled. Brian squeezed my hand. "You're magnificent," he whispered. I squeezed back. We were doing this together. That's what marriage should be, even when it's hard. Cameron, the photographer, leaned in. "Maybe skip the family photos before the ceremony," he suggested. "Do them after. Give everyone time to calm down." I agreed immediately. The last thing I wanted was photos that looked like a hostage situation. I went back to the getting ready room. Julia helped me check my dress, touch up my makeup. My hands were steadier than I expected. I'd just faced down my new in-laws in the most confrontational moment of my life. My reflection showed someone calm, ready. My mom appeared in the doorway, caught my eye. She gave a small nod. Her quiet approval, her pride, meant more than I realized it would. I moved to the entrance, waited behind the closed doors. I could hear the low murmur of guests, speculating about the red shirts. I imagined whispers, guesses. But I'd already decided I didn't care what story people told themselves, as long as Brian and I knew the truth. Wedding music swells. Then the bride's entrance, music begins. The music started. My father appeared, offered his arm. We stepped into view. Brian waited at the altar, his face lighting up when he saw me. Pure love, pure relief. Everything else faded into background noise. I focused on him. Some guests smiled at the survivor shirts, like they were in on a joke. A few looked confused. Most focused on us. That's how it should be. Rita sat in the front row, arms crossed over her. Red shirt, her face a mask of barely controlled anger. Richard beside her looked more resigned than hostile. His shoulder slumped slightly. I filed that away as potentially significant. The officiant greeted us with warmth, his gentle humor cutting through the remaining tension. When he made a joke about marriage being about surviving together through challenges, a few guests laughed. Brian's grandmother smiled. I focused on Brian's face, on the words we were about to say. The family drama became just context, not the main event. This moment was about us choosing each other. During our personal vows, Brian's voice stayed steady. He promised to always have my back, even when it was hard. I knew he was talking about more than just today. He was promising that his family's approval would never matter more than my dignity. I promised him that I'd never ask him to choose between me and them, but I would always expect him to choose our marriage first. His eyes got a little wet. He understood I was releasing him from the guilt they'd tried to use as a weapon. We were building something new, something that didn't require their permission. During the ring exchange, Sophia whispered to her cousin. I saw the cousin's expression shift from curious to disapproving. Sophia was still trying to control the narrative. I chose not to let it distract me. I'd learned you can't stop people from talking. You can only control whether you give them ammunition. I slid the ring onto Brian's finger. He slid mine on, his hand steady. The officiant pronounced us married. Brian kissed me with an enthusiasm that made the guests cheer and clap. For a moment, the red shirts, the family tension, it all disappeared into pure celebration. We were just two people who loved each other, starting our marriage. As we walked back down the aisle, I noticed some of Brian's relatives were smiling genuinely now. Maybe they decided to let go and just enjoy the party. Others still looked stiff, angry. That's fine. We gave them a choice and they made it. Music transitions to more upbeat, celebratory wedding reception music. In the cocktail hour, guests clustered around us, offering congratulations and warm hugs. Several made jokes about the survivor shirts that felt supportive, not mocking. They understood something had happened and they were on our side. An older couple from Brian's practice quietly told us they thought we handled a difficult situation with grace. Their words confirmed that some witnesses saw through the family stunt, recognized our boundary setting. We thanked them. My mom found me, pulled me into a hug, her arms wrapped tight, holding on. The squeeze told me everything she was thinking about how I'd handled the garden confrontation. When she finally pulled back, she leaned close and whispered that my dad had been ready to physically escort the entire family out if they refused the shirts. I laughed. My dad, the most gentle person I know, a retired librarian who cries at commercials, apparently drew a hard line at people trying to ruin his daughter's wedding day. Cameron, the photographer, found us. He wanted to talk photo strategy. He explained he could use angles and cropping to minimize the red shirts, or we could lean into it and make them part of the story. Brian and I, without much discussion, agreed on a middle path. Some traditional shots, downplaying the shirts, and a few honest ones that showed what actually happened, without making it the only thing people saw. We wanted photos that told the truth about our day, not pretty lies. The reception coordinator gathered everyone for our grand entrance. The DJ announced us as husband and wife, adding a playful line about the bride and groom and their survivor family. The guests laughed, a warm, supportive sound. I glanced at Brian's family table. Rita's jaw went tight. But Richard? He cracked a small smile. It was brief, he caught himself quickly, but I saw it. Maybe he had more ability to laugh at himself than his wife did. That tiny moment made me file Richard away as potentially different from Rita. Julia stood up for her maid of honor toast. She talked about my strength, how I handled hard situations with both grace and smart strategy. She never named the drama, but everyone who knew understood. She praised how I knew my own worth and wouldn't accept less than respect. She ended, "Brian is lucky to have found a partner like that." The applause was loud, long. Several people at nearby tables nodded. Midway through dinner, Poppy, the coordinator, leaned down between Brian and me. Richard had just approached her, asking if he could say a few words, probably planning a speech to reframe the shirt incident. Poppy, bless her, came to check with us first. Brian and I looked at each other. The answer was immediate, mutual. We both shook our heads. This was our wedding reception, not Richard's redemption opportunity. Poppy nodded, headed back to where Richard waited. His face showed disappointment, but he didn't argue. Julia slid into the empty seat next to me, holding her phone with a weird expression. Sophia had just posted a selfie. She was wearing the red Survivor shirt. Her caption said something vague about family traditions taking unexpected turns. Clearly meant to mock. I felt a flash of anger. My first instinct was to respond. But Brian put his hand on my arm. "Sometimes people expose themselves better when you let them keep talking," he suggested. "Their own behavior becomes the evidence." I took a breath, handed Julia's phone back. She screenshotted it anyway for our records. After dinner, we asked Cameron to gather Brian's family for one specific group photo. Everyone, clearly visible, wearing the red Survivor shirts. No strategic angles or cropping for this one. Cameron understood immediately. He arranged them. All 23, standing in their bright red shirts over white clothes. We joined them. Everyone smiled for the camera. Rita's smile didn't reach her eyes. Sophia's looked forced. But several cousins and aunts seemed more relaxed now. The photo felt powerful when Cameron showed us the preview. Not because it was pretty or Pinterest-worthy, but because it was proof. Documentation of what happened. If anyone tried to rewrite history later, it showed we set a boundary and enforced it. That mattered more to me than having perfect wedding. Photos. A waiter carrying champagne bumped into me. Champagne splashed down the front of my white dress. Normally, this would be a disaster. The kind of thing that ruins a bride's whole day. But tonight, it just felt like one more thing on a long list. I actually laughed. Brian helped me blot the stain. I told the waiter it was fine, and I meant it. After standing in a garden telling my new in-laws to put on zombie shirts or leave, a stained dress barely registered as a problem. My whole sense of what counted as a crisis had shifted. The champagne would dry. The dress could be cleaned. We were still married. That's what mattered. Music transitions to a slow, romantic first dance song. The DJ announced our first dance. Brian and I walked onto the dance floor. He pulled me close. His arms felt solid, safe. We didn't need to say anything. We both understood without words that we were done explaining or managing his family's feelings tonight. We did what we needed to do. Now we were just going to enjoy being married. Brian leaned his head down. He told me he'd never been more sure of his choice to marry me than when I stood in that garden, holding a box of red shirts. When I refused to be steamrolled, I told him his backing me up meant everything. That him saying those 5 words to his family proved we were a team. We kept dancing. Near the end of the reception, Rita approached me. She was holding a white envelope. Her expression was hard to read. She said she wanted to give us a check to help with proper wedding photos, since today's didn't turn out as planned. Her tone made it clear. She was trying to buy control of the narrative, fund a do-over that erased what actually happened. I took the envelope. Then I handed it right back unopened. My voice was gentle but very firm. Our photos will be exactly what we want them to be, I said. We don't need financial help to remember our wedding day. Her offer was declined. Rita's face flushed red. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it, walked away. Music fades to a quiet, reflective tone. The next morning, I woke up in the hotel bed next to Brian and checked my phone. 7 voicemails from Richard. I put the phone on speaker while Brian ordered coffee. The messages escalated. Calm requests, then optics. People are talking. Fix the narrative. By the 7th, left at 2 a.m., it was just, we need to talk. As soon as possible. My jaw clenched. Brian watched my face. Want me to call him back, he asked. No, I said. Not yet. We need to think about what we want to say. A few days later, a delivery arrived at our house. A box wrapped in expensive paper. The card was from Victoria, wishing you both happiness. Brian and I stared at it. Sincere? Passive-aggressive? Another manipulation? We couldn't tell. The gift inside was nice wine glasses. Brian said we should accept it at face value. Send a polite thank you. But we both agreed to stay cautious. One nice gift didn't erase 2 years of phone calls and family dinners. We put the glasses away. That same afternoon, Julia texted me 3 screenshots. She'd found Sophia's name on social media. The screenshots showed a group chat, started by Rita 3 weeks before our wedding. Family photos coordination. It laid out the entire white clothing plan in detail. Rita told everyone to wear white, made it sound like a unified family statement. She even suggested specific dress codes. This would show Brian what real family loyalty looks like, she'd written. Sophia responded with enthusiasm. Someone asked if it was a good idea. Rita shut down the objection immediately. The screenshots proved it wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated. Seeing the evidence in writing, my anger sharpened. This was exactly what we were dealing with. Rita didn't just dislike me. She actively worked to undermine us. I forwarded the screenshots to Brian without comment. 10 minutes later, he called me from his office. His voice was hollow. He'd hoped it was a misunderstanding. But no, his mother planned this for weeks. Brian came home that evening and went straight to his laptop. He sat at our kitchen table, drafting an email to his parents and Sophia. I watched him type, delete, type again. His hands shook slightly. After an hour, he showed me the draft. The email established new communication boundaries in clear language. All future contact through email only for written record. No surprise visits. No social media commentary about our relationship. Violations would result in a timeout period with no contact. It listed specific examples of unacceptable behavior. It explained that we weren't cutting them off, but we were protecting our marriage. Brian's words were firm, clear, even though I could see it was costing him emotionally. He asked if I thought it was too harsh. I'm proud of you, I told him, for protecting our marriage even when it's hard. He took a deep breath, hit send. We both stared at the screen, knowing there was no taking it back now. The next morning, we packed bags for a short trip. A bed and breakfast 2 hours away, no cell service, limited Wi-Fi. For 3 days, we existed in a bubble where Brian's family drama couldn't reach us. We slept late, took long walks. Nobody knew anything about red shirts or white dresses. The forced disconnection felt like permission to just be newlyweds. On the 3rd day, Brian said, "This is what I want our marriage to feel like. Peaceful. Just us. Not constantly bracing for the next family crisis." I agreed. We talked about how to protect this feeling when we went back to real life. When I returned to my clinic, the gossip had started. Clients made vague references to excitement at your wedding. I kept my responses brief, professional. Memorable day, very happy. I redirected the conversation back to their pets. By the end of the day, I felt confident I could handle these conversations without getting pulled into defending or explaining. Brian, too, overheard country club members repeating rumors that I had manipulated the shirt situation to humiliate his family. He didn't correct them. We talked about how sometimes the truth doesn't matter as much as who tells the story first. Rita and Sophia were telling their version to anyone who would listen. We were staying quiet. Their version was spreading faster because it was more dramatic. But Brian pointed out the people who matter, the people we actually care about, know the truth. The country club gossips don't affect our daily lives. Let them talk. We weren't going to waste energy trying to control a narrative we couldn't control. Later that week, I spent an evening researching couples therapists. I found Miriam Crow. Her bio specifically mentioned helping couples navigate difficult family dynamics, establish healthy boundaries with relatives who don't respect the marriage, experience with family sabotage. Her approach focused on practical strategies. I booked an initial session. Brian agreed immediately. We needed professional help. Music shifts to a more hopeful, steady beat. In Miriam's office, the room smelled like lavender. She asked us a simple question that made me pause. What do you actually want from his family? Not what we wish they were like, but what realistic outcome would we accept? Brian and I looked at each other. We'd never said it out loud. I told her, basic respect. Not sabotaging our wedding. No mean online posts. Being able to go to holiday dinners without criticism or control. We weren't expecting them to love me. We just wanted them to be civil, not actively hostile. Brian added that he wanted his family in his life, but not at the cost of my dignity or our peace. Miriam nodded. She told us, accepting limited relationships is actually healthier than trying to win over people who've decided not to like you. We've been operating under the idea that if we just find the right approach, his family will come around. But some people won't change no matter what we do. And spending energy trying to fix that is just hurting us. This hit me hard. I'd been thinking that way for 2 years. Hearing Miriam say we could just stop trying felt like permission I didn't know I needed. She pulled out a blank sheet of paper and wrote out scenarios. Rita criticizes my cooking. Sophia posts a subtle dig. Richard demands we attend an event. For each, she helped us write exact responses. Simple phrases that don't argue or explain. Just set boundaries. That doesn't work for us. We're not discussing this. She made us practice saying them out loud. At first, I felt confrontational, rude. But Miriam explained, stating a boundary isn't rude. It's just clear. Brian practiced saying, we're not discussing this, without the guilt that usually made him over-explain. 2 days after that session, I was making dinner when Richard's email buzzed. Subject line, can we talk? My stomach tightened. His last emails were angry lists of everything we did wrong. But this tone was different. He was asking if we could meet for lunch to clear the air. He said he understood we were upset and wanted to hear our perspective. It didn't demand anything. It just asked for a conversation. Brian and I debated for an hour. Real or manipulation? We asked Miriam. She said to come in first. In Miriam's office again, we laid out the situation. She helped us work through a framework. We'd meet Richard, but with ground rules. We wouldn't apologize for the shirts. We wouldn't agree to new wedding photos. We wouldn't commit to family events without discussing it privately first. If Richard started making demands, we'd leave. Miriam had us write down our non-negotiables. We also identified where we could show flexibility, listening to him, acknowledging it was hard, expressing willingness for a civil relationship if he respected our boundaries. This framework made the lunch feel less scary. We weren't walking in blind. Brian emailed his father, agreeing to lunch. Saturday afternoon, Brian left. I stayed home. 2 hours later, I heard his car. He looked tired, but there was something in his eyes that might be hope. He sat down heavily. Richard, he said, talked for the first hour. He explained Rita's obsession came from fear. Fear that Brian marrying outside their social circle would hurt the family standing at the country club. She convinced herself if she could just stop the wedding, or make it embarrassing enough, Brian would call it off. Brian said it didn't excuse it, but he understood her behavior was about status anxiety, not personal hatred of me. Richard admitted they handled everything wrong, and the shirt situation was their own fault. He didn't use the word sorry, but he took responsibility for not stopping Rita's plan. Brian laid out clear terms during the second hour. Any future boundary violations would result in reduced contact. If Rita criticized me, we'd leave. If Sophia posted, we'd block her. If Richard controlled our decisions, we'd stop taking his calls. We're willing to be civil, Brian told him, but we won't perform a relationship we don't have just to make Rita look good to her friends. Richard listened without arguing. Brian was shocked. Richard agreed to send an email summary to Rita. The email arrived Sunday morning. Richard copied both of us on a message to Rita, summarizing their lunch. He wrote that the shirt incident was a consequence of the family's coordinated stunt, not unprovoked aggression from us. He stated clearly that we were willing to maintain family relationships, but only if boundaries were respected. It was more honest than I expected. He didn't sugarcoat what happened. Rita's response came 2 hours later. 3 sentences. Received the email and understands the terms. Her tone was cold, stiff, but she didn't argue. Not an apology, but also not defensive. Was this acceptance? We didn't know, but it felt like a tiny step. Then Sophia ruined the moment. She hit reply all. Her message mocked the whole idea of boundaries. She wrote that everyone needed to lighten up. Her tone was dismissive, sarcastic. She hadn't learned anything. Brian read it. Instead of responding, he opened his laptop. He quietly removed Sophia from our shared photo album, muted her on social media. No drama, no explanation. Just action. Monday morning, another email from Rita, directly to us. Subject: moving forward. Sorry we felt hurt by what was meant as family tradition. She was sorry we felt hurt. Not sorry she hurt us. A non-apology. We debated whether to push for a better one. But Miriam's voice was in my head. Pick your battles. Demanding a perfect apology would just create more conflict. We decided to accept her minimal effort, keep our boundaries in place. Her actions would matter more than her words. A week later, a large package arrived from Cameron, our photographer. A handwritten note explained his editing approach, an honest story, angles and cropping to minimize red shirts in some, including them naturally in others. I opened the beautiful leather-bound album. The first pages showed getting ready photos before everything went sideways. Then the ceremony shots. Some cropped tight on us, no family visible. Other shots pulled back, showing his family in their red survivor shirts. Candid moments, Brian's grandmother laughing. Richard talking to my parents with something that almost looked like respect. Looking through the album, I felt satisfied. These pictures showed the truth. They showed us standing together, refusing to let sabotage define our day. 3 days after the album arrived, Poppy, our coordinator, sent an email. Documentation for your records. Several wedding vendors, she wrote, had witnessed the family drama. She'd collected statements from the florist, the caterer, servers, in case we ever needed third-party proof. I saved them in a folder labeled wedding documentation. I hoped we'd never need them, but having them felt like insurance against future gaslighting. Brian read through the statements. The florist's account mentioned Rita laughing with Sophia while coordinating the white clothing before we confronted them. Objective proof. Our version of events wasn't just our perception. It was documented reality. Music becomes more lighthearted, domestic. 2 months later, we hosted a casual open house at our home. My family, close friends. Deliberately leaving Brian's family off the guest list. This party was just for people who genuinely supported us. My parents arrived first. Friends showed up with wine. Julia and her sister hugged me, proud of how we handled everything. The party filled with easy conversation, laughter. Brian's veterinary colleagues treated us like normal newlyweds. Standing in my own kitchen, surrounded by people who actually liked me, I realized how much energy we'd been spending trying to manage hostile relationships. The contrast between this relaxed gathering and our wedding day made the dysfunction of Brian's family even more obvious. Near the end of the open house, the doorbell rang. Richard stood on our porch, holding a wrapped package. My first instinct was to close the door, but he spoke quickly, said he wouldn't stay long, just wanted to drop something off for Brian. I let him in cautiously. Richard handed Brian a vintage restoration manual for car model he'd mentioned wanting to work on. Brian's face showed genuine surprise. It was thoughtful. Richard stayed for 20 minutes, making polite conversation with my parents, asking Brian about a surgery case, never once mentioning the wedding. He complimented our home, thanked us, left without creating any tension. After he drove away, Brian and I stood in the doorway, confused. That was the most normal interaction we'd ever had with his father. My dad quietly said Richard seemed genuine, trying to show respect through actions. This small demonstration of changed behavior meant more than any apology email. Rita's absence from the open house was obvious, but not surprising. That evening, Sophia posted a vague subtweet. Interesting how some people exclude their own blood from celebrations, but expect family to show up when it's convenient. A flash of anger, but responding would just feed her attention-seeking. We ignored it. Brian's cousin texted him privately. She was glad we weren't letting Rita's drama control every family interaction. Several relatives who came to the open house felt the same. The quiet support felt more valuable than public arguments. The following week, Miriam suggested a facilitated phone call with Richard to establish holiday boundaries. We agreed to Thanksgiving at his house if Rita agreed to basic civility. No passive-aggressive comments, no surprise guests like Victoria, no social media posts. Richard said he'd talk to Rita. For Christmas, we were hosting. He was welcome, but Rita needed to decide separately if she could handle being in our space, following our rules. The conversation stayed businesslike. Richard seemed more cooperative than he'd been in months. Miriam pointed out that Richard's willingness to accept our terms showed he was prioritizing relationship repair over his wife's grudges. 2 days later, Rita sent an email to Brian. She wanted a phone conversation with just him to discuss holiday arrangements. Miriam replied firmly, any conversation about our marriage or boundaries needed to include me. Allowing Rita to isolate Brian would undermine our unified front. Miriam drafted a response for Brian, politely declining the one-on-one call, offering another mediated session. Rita's quick rejection confirmed our suspicions. She wasn't trying for a genuine discussion. She was trying to get Brian alone, to manipulate him. This failed attempt actually made us more confident in our boundary system. It proved that including me in all family discussions wasn't paranoid. It was necessary protection. Brian felt relieved, not guilty. Over the next few weeks, work life gradually returned to normal. My clients stopped making vague references to the wedding. My colleagues moved on. We both appreciated that our professional reputations stayed intact. A colleague mentioned she heard we handled some family stuff at our wedding, but clearly dealt with it well. It portrayed us as competent problem solvers. Going back to normal work routines felt grounding after months of conflict. We spent an evening going through the wedding album again, selecting prints for family members who had shown genuine warmth. A brief, polite, but firm note. This album represents the official record of our wedding day. There won't be any retakes or do-over photos or alternative versions. We mailed prints to Brian's grandmother, aunts, uncles, cousins. Rita and Sophia didn't acknowledge receiving theirs. The contrast between relatives who responded with genuine appreciation and those who stayed silent told us exactly who we could count on. A week after sending the photos, Victoria emailed Brian. A short message. She understood he'd moved on, wished both of us well. 3 sentences, more resigned than bitter. She wouldn't be calling or texting anymore. Brian showed me the email. It seemed sincere. Enough. The calls and texts stopped completely. Brian blocked her number anyway. Blocking her felt like closing a door that should have been closed years ago. One less source of drama. 3 months slid by. Richard sent a new email. Subject: overdue honesty. It was longer, and it immediately felt different. He named specific things he did wrong. The critical emails before the engagement. The group text. His silence when he knew about Rita's white clothing plan. The voicemails trying to protect Rita's reputation. He took full responsibility for his own choices. He didn't blame Rita. He proposed email-only communication for a few months to rebuild trust. Brian read it 3 times, cautiously hopeful. We drafted our response, accepting the email-only boundary, appreciating his specific acknowledgments, but not ready for holiday gatherings yet. 2 weeks later, Brian got a call from his cousin Noah. Their Aunt Laura had cornered Sophia at a country club event. Laura told Sophia that the white clothing stunt made the entire family look petty and vindictive, and that Sophia's generation's social media mockery made things worse. Sophia's Instagram, which had been posting regular subtle digs, went completely quiet. The public campaign had ended. While Sophia might still complain in private, she wasn't broadcasting her contempt to hundreds of followers. I recognized that change sometimes happens through unexpected channels. As November approached, Brian and I realized we both dreaded navigating his family's Thanksgiving. Rita sent a formal invitation, hoping we could move past recent unpleasantness. Richard sent a separate email, saying he'd understand if we chose not to come. What we actually wanted was a quiet day at our own house. I called my mom. She agreed immediately. Brian emailed his father to decline. Richard replied, respecting our choice. Thanksgiving morning, my mom arrived with her famous pumpkin pie. The 3 of us cooked. We ate at our dining room table with mismatched dishes. The conversation flowed easily. Nobody criticized the food. When my mom left, Brian and I cleaned up in comfortable silence. The day felt peaceful. Building our own traditions was the healthiest choice we'd made all year. For months after our wedding, life has settled into something sustainable. Brian's family exists at arm's length, with clear rules most of them follow. It isn't warm, but it's workable. Richard sends neutral emails, respecting boundaries. I don't fully trust him yet, but he's making genuine efforts. Rita maintains chilly distance, but she stopped actively sabotaging us. Sophia's social media is quiet. Brian and I have learned to set boundaries without losing ourselves in guilt or anger. Our marriage feels stronger because we faced this crisis together. We proved we could protect our relationship without destroying ourselves. The relationships with his family aren't warm, and probably never will be, but they're honest, and they're ours to define, rather than being dictated by Rita's expectations or country club social politics. Our wedding photos sit on our mantle, everyone in red Survivor shirts. And instead of embarrassment, I feel proud. They represent us refusing to be victims of someone else's sabotage. This isn't a fairy tale ending where everyone learns their lesson and the family becomes close and loving. But it's a realistic victory. We established respect as the minimum requirement for a relationship, and we're willing to accept distance from people who can't meet that standard. Our life together is building around work we love, friends who support us, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing we can handle hard things without compromising who we are. And that, my friends, feels like enough. What about you? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family to protect your peace or your relationship? Or faced a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. I really want to hear your stories.